January 31st, 2025. A concrete chamber sits quiet under fluorescent lights. Marian Bowman Jr. is there, wrists bound, lying on a steel table. The air feels heavy as a clock ticks closer to midnight. In a matter of hours, he'll become the first of 13 men facing execution across America this year. From Texas backroads to Ohio's industrial towns, these men share one truth. Their days are numbered. South Carolina's ready to pull the switch, and Bowman's case is just the beginning. Death row has never been a simple story. It's a battleground of right and wrong, where every name carries a weight of violence and loss. In 2025, that fight's about to heat up again. Some see justice in these final moments. Others see a system too broken to trust. We're here to take you inside, past the headlines, into the crimes, the evidence, and the lives hanging in the balance. This is Death Row 2025. The countdown's already started. The death penalty splits America down the middle, and it's been that way for years. On one side, 23 states have turned their backs on it, erasing it from their laws like a bad memory. On the other, 27 states stand firm, joined by the federal government and the military, keeping it alive as a tool of justice. The rules are strict. The Constitution's 8th Amendment lays down the line: no cruel or unusual punishment. That means death is reserved for the worst of the worst. Aggravated murders, committed by adults the courts say are sound of mind. In 2025, that line brings us to 13 men, each one facing an execution date across 6 states. Oklahoma's wide plains, Texas's sprawling highways, Alabama's quiet towns, Florida's humid coast, South Carolina's wooded edges, and Ohio's Rust Belt cities. These aren't snap judgments either. Most have been locked away for over a decade, 13 years on average, some pushing 30 or more, waiting for the system to call their number. Today, we're laying out who they are. One set a body ablaze to hide his crime. Another walked into a church and left a trail of blood. Their stories carry weight, raw, messy, and hard to look away from. We're starting where it all begins, with the first name on the list. South Carolina kicked off 2025 with a name etched in its history: Marian Bowman Jr. It all traces back to February 16, 2001, a chilly night in a small town. Bowman, 20 years old, stood face to face with Candy Louise Martin, 21, in a spat over a debt. Maybe $200, maybe less. He'd warned her hours earlier, "You'll be gone by nightfall." By dusk, she was shot 3 times with a .38 revolver in a wooded stretch off a back road. Bowman didn't flinch after. He wrestled her limp frame into a car trunk, drove to a desolate clearing, and poured gasoline over her. The match he struck lit up the pines, but it didn't hide the crime. His cousin, James Gadsden, turned witness, said Bowman bragged about it over beers, proud he'd settled the score. Divers hauled the gun from a murky river. Ballistics and DNA tied it tight. For 24 years, Bowman pushed back, swore he was framed, pointed to a hushed-up witness, claimed his own lawyer's racial jabs rigged the jury. Every court said no. January 31st, 2025, 6:27 p.m. South Carolina strapped him down at 44 years old. Lethal injection flowed. The state's first execution in 13 years was done. 5 days later, Texas stepped into the spotlight with its own brand of justice. Texas doesn't wait long to make a point. On February 5th, 2025, Stephen LaWayne Nelson's story closed at Huntsville's State Penitentiary. It started March 3, 2011, in Arlington, a sleepy suburb where North Point Baptist Church stood unguarded. Nelson, 24, walked in. A man with a rap sheet. Probation for battering his girlfriend. A temper on a hair trigger. Reverend Clint Dobson, 28, was prepping a sermon. Judy Elliott, 69, shuffled papers at her desk. Nelson saw cash, not souls. He pounded Dobson with fists. looped a computer cord around his throat, then smothered him with a grocery bag until the struggling stopped. Judy tried to scream. Nelson smashed her face in, left her with a cracked skull and a brain bleed. She lived, barely, after surgeons pieced her back together. He scooped up Dobson's laptop, Judy's credit cards, and peeled out in the pastor's sedan, spent the haul on sneakers and chains. Blood on his shoes and prints in the sanctuary led cops straight to him. Texas juries don't bend for murder like that. At 37, strapped to the gurney, lethal injection hit at 6:50 p.m. CST. Nelson was gone. One day later, Alabama rolled out a method that's turning heads and raising questions. February 6, 2025. Alabama's Holman Correctional Center made headlines again. Demetrius Frasier, 52, met his end. Not with a needle, but a mask pumping nitrogen gas. It began in Birmingham, November 27, 1991. Frasier, barely 18, smashed into Pauline Brown's apartment after midnight, looking for cash to fuel a habit. Pauline, 40, jolted awake, a single mom staring down a barrel. He raped her, fired once into her chest, and when she crawled, pleading, put another bullet through her skull. 4 months later, in Detroit, he trapped 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick in a rotting house, shot her in the spine as she bolted from his hands. Michigan nabbed him in '92. He spilled both killings like it was nothing. Alabama locked him up for Pauline's murder. Michigan threw away the key for Crystal. For decades, he fought. Bad lawyers. Lost evidence. Every angle exhausted. He picked nitrogen over the old way, joining 3 others since Alabama flipped the switch in 2024. At 6:36 p.m., CT, strapped in. The gas took him. 4th in the nation to go that way. A week on, February is proving brutal. Florida's turn came next. February 13, 2025. Florida State Prison lit up its execution chamber. James Dennis Ford, 64, faced the end he dodged for 28 years. It started in 1997, Charlotte County, a sun-soaked nowhere of farms and canals. Ford, a handyman, pitched a fishing trip to Greg and Kimberly Mallory, a couple he'd shoveled dirt with. They piled into his truck, trusting. Out on the water, trust broke. Ford leveled a .22 rifle at Greg's forehead, fired, then grabbed an axe from the boat floor, hacking until bone showed. Kimberly lunged. He pinned her, raped her, beat her head in with the stock, then shoved the barrel between her teeth and pulled again. Their daughter, 22 months old, sat in the van on shore. 18 hours alone, her mom's blood drying on her skin as flies buzzed. Ford tossed the rifle. DNA on Kimberly's torn shorts and axe marks told the tale. Appeals stretched thin. Public outrage over the toddler didn't help him. Governor DeSantis greenlit it in 2024. At 6:19 p.m., lethal injection ran its course. Florida's drought of silence snapped. Same night, Texas kept pace with a man who liked the sound of his own threats. February 13, 2025, wasn't over yet. Huntsville's walls claimed Richard Lee Tabler that evening, 46 years old, pronounced dead at 6:38 p.m. The trail winds to Killeen, November 2004. Tabler and Timothy Payne hatched a lure. Sound gear for Mohammed Ramouni, a nightclub boss with cash to burn. They met him in a lot. Payne rolled tape while Tabler blasted Ramouni twice, dropped his friend Zed with one more. Wallet in hand, they sped off. 2 days later, Tabler flipped, picked Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Lorraine, teenage dancers from his club, sure they'd squealed. He lined them up, shot them cold, 1 bullet each to the temple. Then he dialed the cops, voice dripping with taunts. "Catch me if you can." They did. Confession on the table, retracted later. 4 bodies, a video, his own words. Texas didn't blink. Lethal injection flowed. Tabler's noise went quiet. February's done, but March is creeping closer. Texas has another name on deck. March 13, 2025. Texas has David Leonard Wood in its crosshairs. El Paso, 1987. A dusty border city where women started vanishing. Wood, a furniture store grunt with a past. Rape convictions, parole slips, worked days, hunted nights. 9 girls, 13 to 24, disappeared that summer. October 23rd, cops caught him snatching a teen off the street. Soon, 6 bodies surfaced in shallow desert pits. Throats cut, clothes gone. Fibers from his pickup bed, whispers from cellmates who heard him gloat. Evidence piled up. 3 cases stay foggy, but 6 stuck hard. He's yelled innocent since '87, forced his trial to Dallas for a fair shake. Didn't help. Sentenced in '92, he's ducked the date 33 years. Texas's drug shortages, lawyer moves. At 67, Huntsville's chamber waits. If they get the dose, March 13th ends it. Oklahoma's not sitting still. Days later, they've got their own reckoning lined up. March 20th, 2025, Oklahoma's set to face Wendell Arden Grissom. November 2005, Blaine County. A flat stretch of nothing. Grissom and John Johns, half lit on cheap whiskey, picked a house to rob. Drew Kopp answered the door. 2 daughters and their friend Amber Matthews, 23, huddled inside. Kopp tossed out cash, begged them off. Grissom pulled a 9mm, shot him square in the forehead. Brain matter hit the wall. Amber grabbed Kopp's youngest, bolted. Grissom chased her down, fired into her back, then knelt and put one through her brow as she gasped. They took Kopp's truck, hit a gas station. Cops swarmed within hours. Amber died saving that baby. John's got life. Grissom got the row. He's claiming brain damage now. Clemency's slated for early February, already passed. At 43, March 20th could be his last stand, or another delay. April's quieter, but Texas is stirring again with a body twice burned. April 23rd, 2025. Texas Eyes, Moises Sandoval Mendoza. Collin County, March 2004. A woman, 20, unnamed in records, crossed his path. Mendoza, a drifter with priors, cornered her in her own apartment. Wrapped his hands around her throat, squeezed until her kicks stopped. He dragged her out back, dumped her in a field off Highway 380, left her under a tarp for 3 days. Cops knocked. He spooked, loaded her into his Chevy, drove to a dry well in the sticks, torched her, then piled brush over the char. A neighbor saw smoke, tipped off police. Her melted purse and his tire tracks closed the net. Convicted in 2005, upheld in 2009, he's 40 now. Appeals are thinning. April 23rd looms, unless a Hail Mary plea shifts the ground. Summer breaks, and Ohio digs into a grudge 4 decades old. June 18th, 2025. Ohio's got Percy Hutton on deck. Cleveland, September 1985. Hutton ran with Mitchell and Samuel Simmons, thick as thieves until he swore they lifted his tires and a welding rig. He stewed, vowed blood. September 16th, he and his brother-in-law, Bruce Lester, rolled up to Samuel's porch. Words flew. They shoved both men into a car, hit a vacant lot off East 55th. Hutton drew a .38. 2 shots cracked Samuel's skull. He staggered off, alive by a thread. Mitchell took one to the chest. Didn't move again. Hutton dumped Samuel at a hospital, spun a yarn about a stranger's gun, then turned himself in when the lie unraveled. Ohio's been stalled. Drug hunts pushed his 2022 date. At 63, June 18th hangs, if they find the juice. July's muggy air pulls Ohio back to another 85 nightmare. July 30th, 2025. Samuel Moreland's number comes up in Ohio. November 1st, 1985. Dayton's South Ardmore Avenue. Tia Talbot pushed open her door to a slaughterhouse. 5 dead. Glenna Green, 46. Her daughter Lana, 23, and 3 kids. Datrin Talbot, 7. Datwan, 6. Viana Green, 6. Sprawled across the living room, shot or bludgeoned. 3 more children lay broken. beaten with a pipe, one shot in the leg, left to bleed out, but clinging on. Moreland walked back in, calm as dusk. Cops grabbed him, found a bloody $20 bill in his jeans, gunpowder dusting his knuckles. He's danced with appeals 40 years, state courts, feds, even an international panel. At 63, July 30th's the line. Ohio's patience is threadbare. September's next, and Ohio's not letting up. September 24th, 2025. Ohio's got Douglas Coley in its sights. Toledo, December 1996. A bitter winter night. Coley and Joseph Green cased David Moore unloading groceries in his driveway. 39. A mechanic with a wife inside. They jumped him, forced him into their beat-up Taurus at gunpoint, stripped his wallet, and tore off. In a frozen field off Route 2, Coley leveled a .45, fired 3 times into Moore's chest. Moore played possum, held his breath until they ditched him. He stumbled to a payphone, blood soaking his coat. Days later, January 1997, Samar Lowacki, 27, a nurse, vanished from her parking lot. Her body turned up in a ditch. Same gun, same MO. Green cracked under questioning. Coley's prints on a stolen car, and Loki's purse cinched it. At 49, he's burned through appeals. September 24th. Waits if Ohio's execution drugs hold out. October's leaves fall, and Ohio's got another score to settle. October 30th, 2025. Timothy Coleman's date looms in Ohio. Springfield, January 1996. Snow blanketed the alley behind Riddle's ribs. Melinda Stevens, 32, a waitress turned informant, had been feeding the cops dirt on Coleman's pill trade. He'd been busted, blamed her, told a cellmate he'd make her pay. That night, he lured her out back, said they'd talk. Instead, he drew a Colt .380, pressed it to her skull, fired twice. Gray matter splattered the brick. She crumpled, face down in slush. He kicked snow over her and walked off. Shell casings matched his piece. His own words betrayed him. He denied it at trial, but the jury saw revenge plain as day. At 56, Coleman's out of moves. October 30th could close it, unless Ohio's needle stays dry again. December's chill wraps the year, and Ohio's got one last name to call. December 10th, 2025. Ohio rounds out the year with Kareem M. Jackson. Columbus, March 25th, 1997. A rundown apartment on the east side. Jackson, 23 then, teamed with Michael Patterson, Derek Boone, and a wheelwoman to hit Antonio Hunter's place. Drugs, and cash the prize. Hunter knew Jackson, greeted him by name. Big mistake. They stormed in, shotguns out. Jackson pistol-whipped Becky Lewis, barking threats while the crew ransacked drawers. Hunter and Terrence Walker begged on the floor. Jackson said, "You know me. You die." 2 blasts, point blank, heads blown open. 2 women bolted when the smoke cleared, dialed 911 from a neighbor's. Boone flipped, sketched Jackson's face for the cops. At 51, he's stared down death row 28 years. December 10th's the endgame, if Ohio pulls it off. 13 names carved into 2025, and 5 are already history. Marian Bowman Jr. went down in South Carolina's chamber, flames of his past snuffed out by a needle. Stephen Nelson followed in Texas, a church's peace shattered forever. Alabama's nitrogen cloud took Demetrius Frasier, a new twist in an old game. Florida silenced James Ford, a toddler's cries echoing 28 years later. Richard Tabler's taunts stopped cold in Huntsville, 4 lives erased by his hand. 8 more wait. Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio. Men who've sat on the row so long their crimes feel like faded ink. David Wood's desert graves, Wendell Grissom's whiskey-fueled rampage, Percy Hutton's revenge. Each story, a brick in a wall of violence. The system's wheels grind slow. 13 years average from verdict to gurney. Some over 40, appeals stacking like dust. Methods shift too. Gas in Alabama. injections where they can get the drugs. Ohio's still hunting vials, stalling its line. But what does it add up to? Families of the dead want closure. Families of the condemned beg mercy. Courts draw lines. States pick sides. 27 for, 23 against. 2025's just begun, and these cases, done or coming, force the question. Is this justice squared, or a cycle no one breaks? We're watching it unfold. 2025's death row tally sits at 5. South Carolina, Texas, Alabama, Florida, all struck their marks. Marian Bowman Jr., Stephen Nelson, Demetrius Frasier, James Ford, Richard Tabler, gone. Their stories sealed in state records and prison logs. 8 names still hang in the air, from Texas's desert killer to Ohio's long-waiting condemned. March is closing in. David Wood's date ticks nearer, and the rest stretch out to December's frost. These aren't just cases. They're a mirror. Violence met with violence. Years of waiting met with a final act. We've walked through the blood and the appeals, the gas masks and the needles. But this is only the start. Each name here's got a deeper story. Evidence that held, doubts that lingered, lives cut short on both sides. We're breaking them open, one by one, starting with Bowman's last stand in South Carolina. What's your take? Does the system balance the scales or tip them further? Hit the comments. We're reading. If this is your first ride with us, subscribe, tap the bell. True crime doesn't pause, and neither do we. Next time, we're back with more.